The printed documentary proposal was folded so tightly inside my bridal clutch that the sharp paper edges dug right through the white silk and pressed deeply into my palm. My new husband, Caleb, had told me to leave the papers in the hotel safe. But when you manage a transitional housing program for women escaping controlling families, you learn never to let your leverage out of your sight. My name is Laurel. At 39 years old, I thought I had built a life completely safe from my parents. Then, the heavy oak doors of the Columbus Country Club ballroom swung open. A sudden rush of crisp, late September air cut through the warm smell of vanilla cake and roasted autumn vegetables. The clinking of champagne glasses stopped completely, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. 10 months ago, my mother Beverly walked into my wedding reception wearing an ankle-length black mourning dress. She did not look at the floral centerpieces or the guests, because her eyes locked directly onto me. My father Craig followed right behind her, carrying a tall black tripod that held a smartphone. The little red light on the screen was already glowing, which meant they were broadcasting live. I knew exactly what that phone was for. Since 2 days earlier, I had seen the script they wrote for this exact moment. I did not panic, and I certainly did not run. I just looked across the room at the venue manager and gave a tiny nod. Security was standing by in the hallway, but I needed to wait, because I needed my parents to speak first. The wedding band had been playing a soft jazz song, but the music died out when my mother marched straight to the stage. She snatched the microphone right out of the lead singer's hand. A loud screech of audio feedback echoed off the high ceiling, making several guests cover their ears and shrink back in their chairs. My mother stood at the center of the dance floor, holding the microphone close to her mouth. "We did not come here to celebrate," Beverly said. Her voice echoed, thick with practiced sorrow. "We are in mourning. We are wearing black because the daughter we raised is dead to us." Complete silence fell over the room. I could hear someone gasp near the back tables. My father stood a few feet away from his wife, adjusting the angle of the phone to make sure we were all in the frame. He kept tapping the screen, checking the viewer count. Some of the people staring at us were my wedding guests in the room, but I knew my aunts, uncles, and former neighbors were watching this from their living rooms back home. Caleb stepped forward. His jaw was tight, and I could feel the heat radiating from his arm. He wanted to take the microphone away from that woman. I grabbed his hand and squeezed his fingers hard, leaning in to whisper for him to wait. I needed my mother to say the words out loud. For years, she and my father had built a lucrative media channel on the story that addiction had permanently stolen their child. They never told their followers that I had successfully finished my treatment. I needed them to confirm their lie on their own live stream. "Laurel is still lost to her disease," my mother told the camera, wiping a completely dry eye. "The girl standing there is deep in denial, and she is using this wedding to pretend she is fine. We had to come here and show the world the truth." There it was. Beverly had just called me an active addict. My own mother claimed the family had lost me, and the woman who raised me confirmed they were filming to show the world their version of the truth. Hearing those things in front of my friends felt like a physical blow to the chest. It hurt, but I held my ground. My father stepped into the camera frame next to his wife. He pointed an accusing finger at Caleb. "This man isolated our daughter from her real family," Craig said. His voice boomed through the ballroom without a microphone. "He is controlling her money and keeping her sick. We have tried everything to save her. If you want to help families like ours continue this fight, please click the donation link pinned at the bottom of this video." He just could not help himself. Craig turned an insult into a business transaction right in the middle of my wedding. He had brought a cash register to a funeral that he invented. I let go of my husband's hand and nodded. It was time. Caleb walked smoothly down the steps of the head table. He did not yell, and he did not look angry. The man I was about to spend my life with just walked up to my mother and calmly pulled the microphone from her grip. She was so shocked by his quiet confidence that she actually let it go. Caleb turned to the smartphone on the tripod, looking directly into the camera lens. "You came here to bury her reputation," Caleb said, his voice perfectly steady. "Unfortunately for you, I brought proof. My wife asked me to let you finish your performance first." He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a small remote, pressing a single button. The large projector screen behind the stage, which was supposed to show a slideshow of our childhood photos, suddenly flickered to life. A massive image of an email filled the screen. It was dated 7 years ago, and the sender was Beverly Mercer. The text was highlighted in bright yellow so everyone in the room and everyone watching the live stream could read it clearly. "I am so proud of you for finishing your treatment," the email read. "Your counselor said your recovery is completely stable." I looked at my mother. The tragic, weeping expression on her face vanished, and her mouth dropped open. For 3 long seconds, she just stared at her own words, glowing on the wall. She lost her rhythm completely. She had expected me to scream and throw them out, but she had not expected me to bring receipts. My father reached for the tripod, his hands suddenly shaking. Caleb clicked the remote again. The email vanished, and a new document appeared on the screen. It was the title page of a documentary proposal, sent directly from my father's production company. Right below the bold title, a smaller subtitle was clearly visible to every single person watching. Final episode. It read, "The Wedding Confrontation." The projector light washed over my father's pale face in the ballroom. Seeing that email glowing on the screen dragged me straight back to the day my mother actually typed those words. To understand why my parents turned my wedding into a public spectacle, you have to look back 9 years. My life fractured during a heavy rainstorm on Interstate 70. A delivery truck swerved out of its lane, and my small car spun across the wet asphalt before slamming into a concrete barrier. A surgeon put 3 metal pins in my shoulder to hold the bone together. When the hospital discharged me, the nurses handed over a plastic orange bottle of prescription pain medication. At first, I followed the instructions perfectly. I took 1 pill every 6 hours. But the medication did more than numb my throbbing shoulder. The medicine made the constant noise in my head stop. Every worry about my career, my rent, and my future just dissolved into a warm, heavy fog. The descent happened quietly. I started taking a dose an hour early, then 2 hours early. When the bottle ran empty, I stood at the pharmacy counter and lied right to the pharmacist, claiming I had accidentally dropped the pills down the sink. The shame tasted like sour copper in the back of my throat, knowing I was slipping into something dangerous. I made a decision that saved my life. I found a local outpatient treatment program. Because my health insurance would not cover the full cost, I quietly transferred $3,000 out of a joint savings account I shared with my parents. I did not tell them what the money was for until the clinic officially admitted me. I was not a perfect victim. I made a terrible mistake, and I owned every piece of it. When I confessed the truth, my mother actually stepped up. Beverly drove me to my evening counseling sessions. The woman brought me herbal tea and held my hand in the cold waiting room. She also snapped pictures of me sitting in those uncomfortable plastic chairs, swearing they were just for our private family records. Craig handled the situation differently. My father carried a leather notebook to his Sunday church group, carefully writing down my daily struggles to share as prayer requests. The congregation gave him sympathetic pats on the shoulder. He drank up the attention like water in a desert. 7 years ago, I officially completed my treatment. My counselor signed my discharge papers. My mother sent that glowing email Caleb had just plastered across the ballroom wall. For exactly 1 week, we were a normal family celebrating a victory. Then my phone started vibrating nonstop with notifications. A friend from high school congratulated me on my bravery. A cousin I had not spoken to in years left a crying voicemail. Beverly had published a massive essay on her public social media page. The post detailed my entire private medical history. Right below the text sat a photograph of me looking exhausted and fragile on my first day of rehab. I called her immediately, my fingers gripping the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. I begged the woman to take the post down. Beverly sounded incredibly calm on the other end of the line. "Laurel, people need to hear this," my mother said. "Dozens of families have already messaged me saying our struggle gives them hope. You are being selfish by hiding your story." I sent a long text message that same night, explicitly demanding she remove my medical records from the internet. She completely ignored the message. The likes and shares kept climbing. My father noticed the engagement numbers. Craig had always been a man looking for a profitable angle. A month later, a local community center invited him to speak about family hardship. I refused to attend. He went anyway, using my initials and displaying my old photographs on a large screen. The organizers handed him a check for $500 at the end of the night. That small speaking fee changed the course of my family forever. The money planted a dark seed in my father's mind, but the public adoration truly changed my mother. Beverly discovered that the community adored her much more when she was weeping. A mother with a healthy, recovered daughter is just a regular person with a normal life. A mother fighting a desperate, losing battle against a terrible disease is a tragic hero. Because of that twisted logic, their public story began to shift. The narrative stopped being about my successful recovery. Instead, my parents started using phrases like the daughter we lost and the ongoing nightmare we face. I thought they were just exaggerating to get sympathy from church friends. I had no idea they were building a corporate brand. I moved to Columbus and threw myself into my new job, managing a transitional housing program. I helped abused women set firm boundaries, while completely failing to enforce my own. I stopped going home for the holidays, hoping distance would make my parents lose interest in my life. The silence worked for a few years. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, a coworker walked over to my desk. She looked incredibly uncomfortable. The young woman slid her personal phone across my desk, pushing it right over my paperwork. "Laurel, I am so sorry," my coworker whispered. "Is this really your family?" I looked down at the bright screen. The application was open to a professionally edited video with over 50,000 views. The bold title read, "When Your Addicted Child Chooses Drugs Over Family." Right beneath those words, serving as the thumbnail, was a picture of my face from the day I woke up from my shoulder surgery. The thumbnail image burned into my retinas. Staring at my coworker's phone, looking at my own exhausted face, plastered under a sensational headline, something cold and sharp settled behind my ribs. I thanked my colleague, closed the application, and walked straight to the office printer. The time for polite requests had officially ended. That weekend, I drove 3 hours back to my childhood home. A thick stack of printed screenshots sat on the passenger seat, heavy with the weight of my stolen privacy. My parents were having coffee in the sunroom when I walked in without knocking. I tossed the paper stack onto the glass coffee table. The glossy pages slid across the surface, coming to a stop right next to my mother's teacup. "Take them down," I demanded, keeping my voice dangerously low. "Every single video, every post, right now." Beverly looked at the prints, and her eyes immediately filled with tears. The woman reached out, attempting to grab my hand. "We are trying to help people, Laurel," my mother whispered. "Dozens of mothers message me every week. Why are you so ashamed of your journey?" The sheer audacity made my chest tighten. I was so focused on my mother's crying performance that I did not realize my father had placed his phone face down on the table. The voice memo application was silently running. "You do not want a daughter," I said, my voice shaking with a decade of built-up resentment. "You want an audience." I turned around and walked out the door, believing I had finally drawn a hard line. 2 days later, a new audio clip appeared on their channel. Craig had cut the recording perfectly. His edited version only played the first half of my sentence, ending right after I said they did not want a daughter. Thousands of comments poured in. Strangers praised my parents for their unwavering strength and condemned me as a heartless, broken child abandoning her loving family. Arguing over the phone clearly played right into their hands, so I stopped calling. Instead, I shifted my approach. I opened a hidden folder on my computer. For months, I meticulously took screenshots of every new post, logged the upload dates, and tracked their edit histories. The digital trail clearly showed how they manipulated timelines and fabricated drama. I sent a formal email demanding the removal of my image, attaching a few pieces of my gathered evidence. My father ignored the message completely. The man knew a social worker in her late 20s could not afford a lawyer to fight a drawn-out civil case. He thought I was powerless. He was wrong about my power, but he was right about my bank account. I needed a new strategy, because staying in their orbit was slowly destroying my mind. The following Monday, I walked into a mobile carrier store and changed my phone number. I stopped driving home for Thanksgiving. When Christmas arrived, my mailbox remained empty, and I made sure my outgoing mail never included a return address. Guilt gnawed at the edges of my conscience during those quiet holiday evenings. Sometimes, I would pick up the phone, wondering if the woman who raised me had finally realized what she sacrificed. But the memory of that edited audio clip always stopped my fingers from dialing. I chose silence over being content for their business. Relocating to Columbus gave me a clean slate. I poured all my energy into my job at the transitional housing program. My days were spent helping abused women secure safe apartments and establish firm boundaries with controlling relatives. I was excellent at teaching other people how to protect themselves. Yet, I carried a massive flaw in my own armor. I never told my new friends or coworkers about my past. The addiction, the rehab, and the ongoing exploitation by my family remained locked in a mental vault. I thought silence was a shield, completely unaware that keeping secrets only builds walls around the people you actually want to let in. 2 years after moving, a mutual friend introduced me to Caleb Price. The man worked in commercial risk management, analyzing complex insurance claims with calm precision. We connected over a shared love for quiet Sunday mornings and bad diner coffee. When things got serious, I gave him a heavily sanitized version of my background. I simply told Caleb that my parents and I were not close, implying a natural drifting apart rather than a hostile estrangement. He accepted the vague explanation without pushing for painful details. Our relationship grew stronger over 3 years, and we moved into a small brick duplex near the city park. I truly believed the past was finally buried. Every time a shadow of guilt crept up, I pushed it down, convincing myself that protecting Caleb from my family drama was an act of love. I was wrong. The silence did not protect him at all. It just left him walking blindly into a minefield. A rainy Tuesday evening shattered my carefully constructed peace. I was standing in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for soup, when Caleb walked in from the living room. His footsteps sounded unusually heavy. He stopped beside the kitchen island and set his phone flat on the granite counter. The screen was brightly lit. It showed a familiar background of my parents' living room. Beverly was wiping her eyes, looking directly into the camera lens. "Our daughter is still alive," my mother wept through the small phone speaker. But addiction killed the woman she used to be. Caleb reached out and paused the video. He did not look angry. A deep, heavy hurt clouded his eyes. The kind of pain that comes from realizing someone you trust has been hiding a massive piece of their life. The man I loved looked down at the paused image of my weeping mother, and then he looked back up at me. "Is this about you?" Caleb asked quietly. The kitchen island felt like a witness stand. I looked down at Caleb's phone, staring at the paused video of my weeping mother, and a heavy silence settled over the room. Outside, rain drummed against the window glass, but inside our duplex, the air had gone completely still. I put down the vegetable knife. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, taking a slow, shallow breath. "Yes," I answered, keeping my voice incredibly steady. "That is my mother." The words tasted bitter, like old copper. I stood right there in the warm kitchen and laid out the ugliest parts of my history. I told the man I loved about the car crash, the orange pill bottles, and the early refills. I admitted the lies I told to get more medication, fully expecting him to reach for his car keys and walk out the front door. Caleb just listened. He leaned against the counter, his eyes never leaving my face. When I finally finished explaining the rehab clinic and my successful recovery, he pointed a finger at the glowing phone screen. "And this video?" Caleb asked quietly. "What is happening right now?" I turned around and walked down the short hallway to our home office. My footsteps sounded loud against the hardwood floor. Caleb followed right behind me. I opened my laptop, clicked into the encrypted hidden folder, and showed him exactly what my parents had been doing for the last few years. I laid out the screenshots, the edit histories, and the fabricated timelines. The silence in the small room stretched out until it felt suffocating. Caleb dragged a hand down his face. The tension radiating from his shoulders filled the space. He was furious, but not about the pills. The anger rolling off him stemmed directly from the fact that I had built a massive fortress to keep him out. "You really thought I would leave you over something that happened a decade ago," Caleb said, his voice carrying a sharp edge of genuine hurt. I crossed my arms, my defensive instincts flaring up. The room suddenly felt very cold. "It is my private life," I replied, lifting my chin. "I handled it. I removed myself from their house, and I built a new life." The man shook his head, stepping close enough that I could smell his clean cedar soap. "Your secrets do not just protect you, Laurel," he told me. "They build a wall that prevents me from standing beside you when you are under attack." That single sentence shattered the ice in my chest. I suddenly realized my fierce independence had slowly morphed into complete isolation. We sat down on the faded office rug, and we made a formal agreement. I transferred the entire evidence folder to his computer, giving him full access to the digital trail, but I also looked him straight in the eyes and laid down a strict, non-negotiable boundary. "You cannot call them," I told him, enunciating every word. "You cannot fix this for me behind the scenes. Absolutely no public action happens without my explicit permission." Caleb clearly hated the idea of sitting quietly while two strangers monetized his partner's name, but he nodded. The risk manager agreed to follow my lead, trusting my judgment over his protective instincts. That fragile truce held perfectly for nearly a year, right up until a quiet Sunday morning changed our trajectory. We were sitting on the front porch drinking cheap diner coffee. The autumn air felt crisp against my face. Caleb pulled a small, worn velvet box out of his jacket pocket and set it on the wooden table between our mugs. There was no grand speech, no hidden photographer, and no public spectacle. He simply asked if I wanted to build a real family with him. I said yes, and a terrifying realization immediately followed. An engagement meant a wedding, and a wedding meant a highly visible target. Later that evening, I suggested we just go to the downtown courthouse and sign the marriage papers in secret. Caleb reached across the sofa and took my hand, his thumb tracing the line of my knuckles. He reminded me that hiding meant letting Beverly and Craig dictate the shape of our future. We ultimately decided to host a real wedding, refusing to shrink our happiness just to avoid their cameras. 6 months before the ceremony, a thick cream envelope arrived in our mailbox. The familiar cursive handwriting on the front belonged to my mother. I opened the letter at the kitchen counter, my fingers tracing the expensive textured stationery. Beverly wrote that she desperately missed her only daughter. The woman did not offer a full apology for the videos, but the letter did include the carefully worded phrase, "Mistakes were made." She claimed she just wanted to sit quietly in a church pew and watch me get married, swearing on her faith that she would not bring a camera or mention her media channel to anyone. The plea felt incredibly manipulative. Yet, a tiny, foolish corner of my heart actually wondered if a mother's basic love might occasionally outweigh her desperate need for an audience. I did not reply with a tearful phone call. I replied with a strict legal contract. My response laid out absolute conditions for their attendance. No live broadcasting, no speeches, and no media guests. I specifically forbade my parents from using my name or any photographs from the wedding venue on their platforms. To my immense surprise, Beverly and Craig signed the document and mailed it back without a single complaint. For 4 quiet months, I actually let myself believe we had found a tense but manageable peace. Then, August arrived. Exactly 2 months before the wedding date, a new email from my father landed in my inbox. Craig claimed he needed me to sign a standard media release form. His message called it a routine requirement for the professional photographer they wanted to hire to shoot a personal family album. The attached document looked exactly like a generic legal template. But my eyes caught a small, densely packed block of text buried at the very bottom of the second page. The fine print explicitly granted his production company the permanent right to use my image and likeness in future documentary and educational content. The thick paper of the media release felt heavy and wrong in my hands. Taking a heavy black marker from my desk drawer, I drew a thick, dark line straight through the documentary clause at the bottom of the page. The ink bled completely through the back of the sheet. I placed the altered document in a mushy envelope and mailed it directly back to my father's production company. Craig called exactly 2 days later. That is just standard legal language for any photographer, he insisted, his voice dripping with forced patience. The older man spoke to me like I was a confused child refusing to eat her vegetables. I refused to back down. I need a written confirmation that my image will not appear in any commercial project, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly flat. Otherwise, the invitation is officially revoked. We reached a tense standoff, which eventually led to a reconciliation dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant downtown later that week. The smell of roasted garlic and warm bread hung heavily in the air. My mother behaved perfectly during the appetizer course. The woman ordered sparkling water, smiled gently, and asked polite questions about my floral arrangements. But my father spent the entire meal interrogating me about the venue logistics. The official wedding invitations already listed the name and address of the country club, which gave them the basic location. Craig, however, wanted the detailed floor plan. Where exactly is the main stage positioned? The older man asked, cutting into his chicken parmesan. And what time do the vendors have access to the loading doors? I took a slow sip of my wine, keeping my expression entirely blank. The venue manager handles all of those logistics, I told him. Caleb shifted in his leather booth seat, his leg pressing warmly against mine under the table. On the drive home, my fiancé pointed out the obvious truth. Your father did not ask a single question about how you were feeling, or where we were going for our honeymoon, Caleb noted, keeping his eyes fixed on the wet road. He was entirely focused on lighting angles, room layout, and technical access. The pressure campaign started a few days after that dinner. An aunt from my mother's side called to remind me how incredibly grateful I should be for this olive branch. Her voice crackled through the phone speaker, full of self-righteous judgment. Another distant relative actually left a voicemail, suggesting Caleb was controlling my schedule, isolating me from the people who raised me. I did not waste my breath arguing with people who only knew half the story. I simply drafted a clear list of boundaries regarding privacy at the ceremony and emailed the document to every single family member on the guest list. My parents retaliated through their audience. A new video appeared on their main channel the very next morning. Beverly sat in her usual armchair, wearing a pastel cardigan and looking fragile, but hopeful. We may finally see our daughter again soon, she told the camera, clasping her hands together over her chest. She never mentioned my name or the wedding directly, but the implications were incredibly loud. I scrolled through the comment section on my laptop. Strangers were encouraging my parents to demand a public apology from their wayward child. Several viewers actually suggested staging a confrontation to force a family breakthrough. Craig left every single hostile comment visible on the page, letting the digital mob build momentum. The escalating digital aggression forced my hand. I walked into a sleek downtown office building and hired an attorney specializing in privacy and defamation. The legal team immediately drafted a formal cease and desist letter, demanding my parents refrain from filming or exploiting the wedding event. They also issued a strict preservation notice, legally requiring the production company to save all internal communications and video drafts. My lawyer warned me that a full lawsuit right now would consume the entire wedding week, dragging us into a courtroom instead of a chapel. We needed concrete evidence of a new violation, not just suspicious questions over a dinner table. That concrete proof almost arrived the following Tuesday. My office phone rang while I was organizing housing files. The country club manager sounded incredibly confused on the other end of the line. Laurel, someone just called asking about the service elevators and broadcast equipment placement, the manager explained, his voice tight with concern. The caller claimed to be part of your family media team, but they are not on the approved vendor list you gave me. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. When I confronted Craig through a text message, he completely denied knowing anything about the phone call, claiming a zealous fan must have figured out the venue. I immediately called the country club back. I ordered them to lock down all technical access points and hire extra security guards for the entrance doors. We established a strict rule for the weekend. Guests could bring their personal cell phones, but absolutely no unregistered professional broadcasting equipment was allowed inside the building. We had successfully secured the physical perimeter, but the real threat came through a digital side door. Exactly 2 days before the ceremony, a notification popped up on my computer monitor. An email had arrived in my public work inbox, the address listed openly on my housing program's website. The message contained no attachments, just a single paragraph of text and an office phone number. "My name is Tessa Cole," the message read. "I work on your parents' documentary. Please have your attorney verify my identity. You need to see the final episode planned before Saturday." The glowing computer screen held Tessa Cole's message for exactly 10 seconds before my finger clicked the forward button. Sending a direct reply felt entirely too dangerous, so the email went straight to my legal team. My attorney received strict instructions to verify the sender's identity and employment status. 3 anxious hours passed, dragging by at an agonizing pace, leaving me pacing the length of my office. Finally, the lawyer called back, confirming that the phone number belonged to a legitimate desk inside my father's production company. Tessa possessed authorized access to the project files as part of her daily job, making her a legal whistleblower rather than a rogue hacker. A secure, encrypted digital link arrived in my inbox shortly after sunset. Caleb stood right behind my desk chair, his hand resting heavy and warm on my shoulder as the first document loaded. The bright white title page of a pitch deck filled the monitor. Right below my parents' channel logo, bold black letters spelled out the words, "Final Episode, The Wedding Confrontation." A detailed shooting script followed on the next page, explicitly describing my mother walking into the reception wearing a black morning dress. The emotional peak of their planned scene rested on a single, devastating line of dialogue. Beverly was scheduled to snatch a microphone and announce to the entire room that their daughter was dead to them. My stomach twisted into a tight, cold knot. The cruelty went far beyond a simple wardrobe choice. Craig had typed out specific camera directions, highlighting a demand to keep the lens focused tightly on my face the moment I started crying or shouting. The production notes openly banked on venue security dragging them out of the ballroom. That exact footage of their physical removal would be edited later, perfectly framed as evidence that a sick, ungrateful child was aggressively rejecting her loving family's intervention. The next file in the folder proved they knew exactly what they were doing. It was a chain of internal messages from 4 years ago. Beverly had forwarded the original email, celebrating my successful completion of rehab to her husband. Craig's reply sat right underneath it, clear as glass. The man wrote that acknowledging a stable recovery complicated the narrative, instructing the editing team to permanently delete any mention of my clinical discharge from their promotional materials. The metadata attached to the file verified the timeline, showing the exact date my father chose a profitable lie over my actual survival. Caleb stepped away from the desk. His boots hit the hardwood floor with sharp, angry thuds. Turning toward the window, his jaw locked tight as he demanded we immediately cancel the country club reservation. My fiancé wanted to move the ceremony to a private courthouse and ban my family completely. "They will just set up their cameras on the public sidewalk outside the courthouse," I told him, keeping my voice quiet but firm. "If we run, they get to control the story again. Craig will just film himself standing in the rain, claiming we locked them out." Running meant surrendering, and I refused to spend my marriage hiding from a camera lens. We spent the next 48 hours engineering a trap. We coordinated with the venue manager, establishing a strict timeline. My parents would get exactly 2 minutes to speak. Security guards were instructed to wait by the doors, moving in only when I gave a specific physical signal. We also mandated that guests could only carry personal cell phones, strictly banning any unregistered professional broadcasting equipment from entering the building. Capturing the truth required an airtight net of independent evidence. My attorney assigned a paralegal to monitor my parents' public social media account from a remote office. The moment a live stream began, the paralegal would start recording the computer screen, capturing the live video feed, the web address, the exact timestamp, and the scrolling comments. Meanwhile, our official wedding videography team received a new set of instructions. They were ordered to keep a wide-angle camera rolling on the dance floor and maintain a direct audio feed from the disc jockey booth, no matter what happened. Finally, the country club manager confirmed their overhead security cameras would run continuously, providing a silent, indisputable visual timeline of every physical movement in the room. Caleb took charge of the counterattack presentation. We sat on the living room rug, sorting through the digital files to build a slideshow. My fingers hovered over my old medical charts, the pages detailing my lowest, most shameful moments. A deep wave of nausea rolled through my chest. I dragged those specific files straight into the digital trash bin. "I am proving they lied about the timeline," I said, looking up at the man I was about to marry. "I am not putting my worst year on a projector screen for a room full of strangers." We narrowed the presentation down to the business pitch deck, the script, and the single email confirming my recovery. The trap was set, the evidence was clean, and my boundaries were locked in place. But the illusion of total control shattered right before midnight on Friday. I was sitting in my hotel room, steaming the wrinkles out of my veil, when my cell phone vibrated on the nightstand. A final, urgent message from Tessa appeared through our encrypted channel. "Craig knows someone leaked the files," the message read. "He has changed part of the plan." The warning from Tessa echoed in my head as my mother snatched the microphone. We had successfully blocked their heavy tripods at the front country club doors, and the security team rigorously checked every vendor bag, confiscating 2 professional broadcasting cameras before the reception even began. But Craig had outsmarted the physical perimeter using an unwitting accomplice. My elderly aunt walked into the ballroom clutching a secondary cell phone, completely believing Beverly needed the device to coordinate a post-wedding driver. That small piece of glass and metal was already logged in to my parents' primary media account, connected directly to a cellular data network, and bypassing the venue network entirely. Hours earlier, their channel had posted an ominous notification for a scheduled broadcast titled, "Tonight, we finally tell the truth about our daughter." Hundreds of neighbors, church members, and distant relatives were already waiting online when the camera went live. Now, my mother stood under the crystal chandelier in her black mourning dress, declaring me dead to the room. Her weeping performance matched the stolen script perfectly, right up until my father stepped into the frame. Craig pointed his aggressive finger at Caleb, and the deviation Tessa warned me about finally revealed itself. Instead of merely pushing the addiction narrative, my father launched a brand new attack. He loudly accused my new husband of financial exploitation, claiming Caleb had isolated me to drain my bank accounts. This fresh lie was completely unscripted, designed to destroy both of us in one swift motion before the security guards could react. A sharp sting of panic hit my chest, but I caught Caleb's eye across the dance floor. Giving him 2 quick nods, I signaled my husband to abandon the planned medical evidence slides and jump straight to the financial documents. Caleb moved with quiet purpose, stepping up to take the microphone from my mother's hand. Pressing a small remote, he brought the ballroom wall to life with my mother's old email celebrating my stable recovery. Craig immediately sputtered, waving a frantic hand at the projection and shouting that the document was a fabricated lie. My husband did not argue, because the evidence spoke louder than any shouting match. He simply clicked the remote again. The pitch deck for the documentary appeared on the wall, displaying the bold letters calling me an active addict. Before my father could shout another denial, the slide transitioned to a complicated email chain. The message displayed Craig's exact digital address, complete with a timestamp, and the metadata proving he had deliberately ordered his editing team to erase any mention of my successful rehabilitation. The silence in the room shifted from shock to deep, uncomfortable tension, planting a seed that was about to break the internet. While the wedding guests stared at the wall, a completely different kind of chaos erupted online. Our paralegal was safely sitting in a downtown Columbus office, recording every second of the live video feed alongside the scrolling chat. The digital comments, which had started with sympathetic prayers, suddenly fractured into confusion and anger. A woman from my parents' street typed a furious message in all capital letters, demanding answers because Beverly had just told the neighborhood watch group that I was actively refusing treatment. The bright projector light exposed the truth, and the unified front of my parents crumbled in real time. Panic stripped away my mother's tragic facade, causing her to point a shaking finger directly at her husband. She cried into the microphone that Craig was the one turning our family pain into a ruthless business. My father immediately fired back, his face flushing dark red as he shouted that the funeral dress and the dead daughter line were entirely her ideas. Standing right there in front of a live camera, they accidentally confirmed everything. The 2 people who raised me admitted to knowing the script, staging the confrontation, and exploiting the event for views. Their desperate attempts to dodge blame merely cemented their guilt into the venue security footage and our official wedding video audio track. Stepping forward, I gently took the microphone from Caleb's hand. The cold metal grounded me in reality. "You were warned," I told the two strangers standing on my dance floor. "You knew the truth, and you chose the version that paid better." Looking past them, I locked eyes with the head of security near the double doors and gave one final nod. 3 men in dark suits immediately moved in, firmly guiding my parents away from the stage. Giving Beverly no more time to cry, and refusing to let Craig spout another excuse, I turned my back on them. Facing my stunned wedding guests, I forced a small, polite smile. "They have taken enough of this day," I said, signaling the band to start the music again. Just as the jazz singer nervously stepped back to the microphone, a heavy vibration shuddered against my thigh. I pulled my phone from a hidden pocket in my silk skirt. The screen was completely filled with frantic notifications. A text message from the aunt who had unknowingly smuggled the camera phone sat at the very top. "Every relative is watching," she wrote, "and so is your parents' entire neighborhood." Right beneath that warning, another message arrived from my attorney. "Do not let them delete anything. The live stream just changed the entire case." The jazz band stumbled back into a rhythm, and the heavy ballroom doors clicked shut behind my parents. A collective exhale moved through the room, rustling the silk dresses and shifting the velvet chairs. Caleb wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me firmly onto the center of the hardwood floor for our first dance. The song was not perfect, and my pulse was still hammering against my collarbone, but the moment belonged entirely to us. A few older guests approached our table later that evening. I accepted their words with a simple nod, refusing to turn my wedding reception into a press conference. The real aftermath began unfolding on a glowing screen inside our hotel suite at 2 a.m. My phone buzzed relentlessly against the wooden nightstand. Unlocking the device revealed a flood of messages from the extended family. Some cousins offered immediate support, while an older aunt scolded me for airing private family matters in public, completely ignoring the fact that my parents had brought the camera. Another message contained a screenshot of the main family group chat. The image showed dozens of relatives reacting to the live broadcast in real time, watching the entire confrontation unfold. At the very bottom of the captured image, a small notification indicated that the uncle, who had always loudly defended my father, simply left the conversation without typing a single word. By the time room service delivered coffee the next morning, the social collapse had already spread beyond our family tree. Caleb read the local news updates aloud while sitting on the edge of the hotel bed. 2 news vans were currently parked on the street outside my childhood home. Neighbors who had previously attended Beverly's charity events recognized the scam and began demanding accountability in community forums. A member of my mother's church council sent me a quiet email, confirming the congregation had temporarily suspended Beverly from her leadership role in the family support program. Less than an hour later, a downtown business association officially canceled my father's upcoming speaking engagement. The walls were closing in on their carefully constructed empire, but cornered animals always bite back, and my parents were no exception. Craig launched his counteroffensive right before noon. My father posted a typed statement across all their social platforms, aggressively claiming the documents projected at the wedding were stolen and maliciously altered. Beverly followed up immediately with a tearful video recorded in her kitchen. The older woman sobbed into the lens, declaring that her own daughter had orchestrated a cruel ambush to destroy a ministry built on love. Their loyal followers flooded the comment section, demanding justice for the heartbroken parents. They thought they could spin the narrative one last time, relying on the fact that internet audiences have incredibly short memories. But the two of them had no idea about the invisible net slowly tightening around their operation. My parents did not know our paralegal had captured a flawless screen recording of their entire public broadcast, complete with the web address and the live viewer comments. They were completely unaware that the wedding videographers possessed pristine, high-definition footage with direct audio feeds. Furthermore, the country club manager had already locked away the overhead security recordings, permanently preserving a silent, unbiased timeline of every physical movement in that ballroom. The pressure to defend myself online felt incredibly heavy, and my fingers hovered over the keyboard several times that afternoon. Caleb gently pulled the laptop away, reminding me that engaging in a digital shouting match would only give their channel more profitable traffic. We chose strategic silence instead. Our attorney released a single brief statement to the press, confirming the fraudulent documents would be handled strictly through the proper legal channels. I sent a private message to my wedding guests, asking everyone to refrain from sharing any of the specific medical timelines or personal photographs online. While the internet raged, the legal machinery quietly hummed to life. My lawyer spent Monday morning firing off official preservation letters to every party involved in the broadcast. Formal documents landed on my parents' doorstep, the social media platform headquarters, and the independent production company offices. The legal notices carried severe penalties for destroying any data related to the event. Tessa confirmed through our encrypted channel that the original pitch decks and internal emails remained safely backed up on her employer's servers. The paralegal locked the screen recording into a secure digital vault, while the videography team handed over their master files directly to the law firm. The legal team uncovered a massive structural crack in my father's business deals late that afternoon. The documentary producers not only suspended the upcoming film project, but their corporate lawyers contacted our office with a terrifying revelation. To secure his initial funding, Craig had submitted a written guarantee, explicitly promising that I had given full legal consent to appear in the final episode. My father had actively forged a promise he could never keep, turning a simple family dispute into a massive breach of contract and an unauthorized use of my personal image. The stakes instantly multiplied, moving from social embarrassment to severe financial liability. Wednesday morning, Caleb and I sat in a sleek glass conference room overlooking the city skyline. Our attorney slid a thin cream folder across the polished mahogany table, placing two very different options right in front of me. "Your parents are panicking," the lawyer explained, tapping the folder. "Their representatives just offered a quiet settlement. You take a fast, generous payout today, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and all the old videos quietly disappear by tomorrow morning. Your second option involves a lengthy public civil suit. It will cost months of your life, but we can force them to issue a formal correction on their own platform." The fast money offered an immediate escape hatch, a chance to simply walk away and never think about their media channel again. My husband reached under the table, his warm hand resting on my knee, waiting for my decision. I stared at the settlement offer for a long time, remembering the thousands of strangers who had believed the worst things about me for years. Closing the folder, I pushed the documents back across the polished wood. "I do not want hush money," I said, my voice perfectly steady in the quiet room. "I want the lie corrected exactly where they sold it." The months following that conference room meeting stretched into a long, grueling test of endurance. Choosing the public path meant dragging a family war through the formal machinery of the civil court system. My attorney filed comprehensive complaints centered on intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and the unauthorized commercial exploitation of my name and likeness. We did not expect an immediate victory, and the legal process moved at a glacial, exhausting pace. Every few weeks brought a new round of depositions, document reviews, and motions filed by my father defense team. Financial transparency arrived piece by piece through court-ordered discovery, painting a devastating picture of my parents' digital empire. Bank statements and platform analytics exposed the true scale of the cash flow generated by their carefully cultivated tragedy. Advertising revenue, speaking fees, and direct fan donations had funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars into a joint account over the years. Forensic accountants discovered that a substantial portion of those charitable donations, intended to support grieving families, had instead been siphoned off to fund their personal lifestyle and production expenses. The corporate scaffolding supporting their brand began collapsing from the top down. Two major corporate sponsors, horrified by the wedding livestream revelations and the pending litigation, abruptly terminated their contracts. The independent production company holding the documentary rights officially canceled the project, demanding the immediate return of a hefty financial advance. Meanwhile, the online video platform suspended monetization across all their channels, freezing their primary income stream while compliance investigators reviewed the fraud allegations. Social consequences bled rapidly into their physical neighborhood in Columbus. Reporters and curious bloggers occasionally parked their cars near my parents' house, flashing cameras whenever the garage door opened. Longtime neighbors who had generously donated to their online fundraisers quietly distanced themselves, realizing they had been manipulated. A community town hall meeting was organized by local church members, demanding a transparent accounting of all charitable funds collected under the guise of family advocacy. Beverly found herself completely stripped of her committee positions, while Craig saw his small media consulting business dry up overnight. Living under the same roof quickly turned my parents against each other as the pressure mounted. Beverly cornered her lawyer during a joint phone call, weeping hysterically and blaming Craig for taking the monetization scheme too far. My father fired back through his own legal counsel, releasing a series of internal emails proving my mother had personally written every dramatic script and emotionally charged caption. Their marriage fractured along the fault lines of self-preservation, transforming their home into a cold battleground where they communicated exclusively through warring legal teams. The emotional toll of the ongoing litigation weighed heavily on my own shoulders as well. Preparing for my deposition required sitting in a small conference room for hours, forcing me to recount the darkest days of my past addiction to strangers in formal suits. My professional reputation faced subtle whispers when an anonymous packet containing old medical records was anonymously mailed to the administrative offices of my housing program. A regional board member pulled me into a private office to express concern over the public drama. I calmly placed my clean discharge records and my current certification documents on the desk, looking her straight in the eyes. The board voted unanimously to keep me in my position, but the experience left a raw, jagged ache behind my ribs. Through every difficult evening, Caleb remained a steady, unmovable anchor. My husband never once complained about the mounting legal fees or the endless streams of paperwork taking over our dining room table. Whenever exhaustion threatened to swallow me whole, he simply made tea, placed a warm hand on my shoulder, and reminded me why we refused to back down. We were not fighting for revenge. We were fighting for the simple right to define our own reality. The turning point finally arrived 7 months after our wedding day, when our attorney called us back into his glass-walled office. A thick manila folder rested in the center of the mahogany desk, containing the finalized terms of a comprehensive settlement agreement. My parents had exhausted their financial resources, fighting a losing battle against an airtight wall of evidence. Their production company was liquidated, their primary savings accounts were drained to cover legal fees, and they were forced to list their large suburban home on the market to satisfy impending restitution claims. The proposed agreement granted every single demand I had originally made. They agreed to pay substantial financial damages, issue full refunds to donors through a monitored restitution fund, and completely scrub their platforms of every video mentioning my name. But as my eyes scanned down to the final paragraph, a familiar roadblock appeared in bold print. My father was willing to sign away the money and the channel, but a stubborn clause at the bottom explicitly stated they refused one specific demand. They were willing to post a written statement drafted by our lawyers, but they absolutely refused to turn on a camera and read a public retraction in their own voices. I looked up from the papers, meeting my attorney's steady gaze across the polished wood. They will pay the damages and close the channels, the lawyer said carefully, leaning back in his leather chair. They just draw the line at filming themselves apologizing. I closed the manila folder with a soft, decisive thud. Standing up from the table, I smoothed down my skirt and looked toward the doorway where Caleb was already waiting with my coat. Then we keep going, I said. Their refusal to read a retraction on camera ended the settlement negotiations that afternoon. My attorney formally rejected the partial agreement and continued preparing the case for trial. Over the next 3 weeks, both sides exchanged final witness lists, organized financial records, and identified the internal emails that would be presented in open court. My parents' attorneys made several attempts to revive the settlement without the recorded correction, but I refused each one. 4 days before the scheduled trial, Beverly and Craig attended a final settlement conference with their separate legal teams. By then, they understood that the bank statements, documentary contracts, wedding footage, and unedited email chains would become part of a public court record if the trial went forward. Their remaining sponsors were gone, their legal expenses were still rising, and neither of them wanted to testify under oath about who had created the false story. That evening, their attorneys submitted a revised agreement accepting every original term. Beverly and Craig finally agreed to record the full correction without editing, conditions, or additional commentary. They did not surrender because they had suddenly developed a conscience. They surrendered because the trial was only days away, and the evidence had left them nowhere else to hide. The final financial reckoning dismantled their digital empire piece by piece. The documentary project was canceled permanently, and their primary media channel lost its monetization privileges forever. The remaining corporate advances and a large portion of their past earnings had to be repaid through a court-supervised restitution fund. To cover the mounting legal fees, court-ordered damages, and the massive debt, Beverly and Craig were forced to put their large suburban home on the market. A sleek moving truck appeared in their driveway during a chilly morning. While neighbors watched from behind closed curtains and refused to offer a helping hand, Craig also lost control of his small media consulting firm, liquidating his business assets to satisfy the final monetary judgments. Social isolation arrived just as swiftly as the financial ruin. The extended family members who had watched the wedding live stream no longer bought into the narrative that I had staged a cruel ambush against my parents. The local church community formally requested that Beverly step down from her leadership position, stripping her of the weekly public spotlight she cherished so deeply. Donors who had contributed to their online fundraisers received official email notices from the platform administrators, complete with instructions on how to claim a full refund from the frozen accounts. Nobody organized a farewell party for them, and no sympathetic friends stepped forward to defend their reputation in public. The mandated video recording session took place inside a neutral legal office under the watchful eye of a court reporter. My parents sat side by side in front of the exact same ring light and fabric backdrop they had used for years to broadcast their fabricated tragedies. There was no emotional background music, no dramatic pauses, and no clever editing tricks allowed. Beverly had to look directly into the camera lens and state clearly that I had successfully completed my medical treatment years ago. She was forced to admit that they knew the truth about my recovery, yet deliberately chose to use misleading language to boost their viewer numbers. Furthermore, she had to confess that they never secured legal permission to exploit my wedding ceremony for commercial entertainment. Craig had to follow her lead immediately. My father looked pale and exhausted as he read his portion of the statement, officially confirming that the documents presented at the wedding were entirely authentic and completely free of digital alteration. When the raw video file arrived at our lawyer office, I did not sit down to watch the entire recording. I only checked the playback timeline to ensure the footage was unedited and that the description box contained the active link for donor refunds. The finished video went live on their primary channel on a Tuesday afternoon, instantly becoming the most watched piece of content they ever produced. The comment section filled up rapidly with shocked messages from former followers who realized they had been systematically deceived for years. I closed my laptop screen, turned away from the notifications, and never opened their channel again. The final desperate attempt at reconciliation arrived through the mail a week after the video was posted. Beverly sent a handwritten letter to my office, begging for a private meeting so we could record one final family conversation behind closed doors. Holding the folded paper in my hand, I realized my mother still viewed human connection as a performance that required an audience or a recording device. Craig did not attempt direct contact, though his lawyer quietly asked if I would permit them to archive a few old holiday videos on a private hard drive. I rejected both requests without a moment of hesitation. 10 months had passed since the afternoon my parents walked into my wedding reception wearing black mourning dresses. Sitting at the wooden kitchen table in our duplex, I opened the medical intake folder for my transitional housing program and picked up a pen. When I reached the section requiring an emergency contact name, my hand did not shake. I drew a neat line through my mother name, crossing out the phone number I had memorized as a child, and wrote down Caleb name instead. My husband walked into the kitchen carrying 2 mugs of coffee, stopping beside my chair to look down at the papers. He reached out, gently setting his hand over mine while we stared at a framed wedding photograph sitting on the counter. In the image, we were smiling brightly under a canopy of autumn leaves, surrounded by friends who loved us for who we were, completely free of empty frames or uninvited guests. I did not spend a single second celebrating the fact that my parents had lost their home and their livelihood. True peace had nothing to do with their punishment, and everything to do with my own release. I finally understood that I did not need anyone to make them love me, because I had simply stopped letting them sell a lie. When someone uses your deepest struggles to build a stage for themselves, you do not have to stay trapped in their script. Protecting your peace sometimes means walking away from the people who are supposed to keep you safe. And that choice does not make you broken. You are allowed to outgrow the versions of yourself that others try to freeze in time, and you never owe anyone your silence just to keep their illusions alive. True strength is not about letting people walk all over you until they finally feel guilty. It is about drawing a sharp, unyielding line and refusing to let anyone else define your worth. Have you ever had to walk away from someone who loved the idea of your struggle more than they loved you? And how did you finally find the courage to reclaim your own story?